everyone. Today I am going to show you a video where we are going to practice 4 basic watercolor techniques, and at the end of the video you are going to select the techniques you like to create a background. So what you will need is you will need your provided watercolor paper, a jar with some water and your brushes, your watercolor palette, a little bit of salt or sugar, some coffee, I'm using instant coffee grounds, and then some plastic wrap. So I just have plastic cling wrap, but you could also use a Ziploc bag. The next thing you're gonna need to do is you are gonna need to decide what tertiary colors you are gonna paint in today. There are 6 options. The first one is blue-green, second, yellow-green, third, yellow-orange, fourth, red-orange, fifth, red-violet, and last, blue-violet. Does not matter which tertiary you pick, just pick one, and that's one I'd like you to stick with today. Once you have determined which colors you would like to paint with, I want you to get those 2 colors wet. So I'm gonna do blue, violet, and so I'm gonna put some water in my blue and some water in my violet and set those aside. The other thing you're gonna need to make sure you have is tape, because we're gonna tape off our section. So I've already prepped my paper. I have put masking tape all the way around to keep my paper down so it doesn't buckle and bow and twist while I am painting. It also helps the paper dry flat. So before we start painting, I want you to take the smaller piece of paper at the top, take a piece of tape, and I want you to tape it in half. Doesn't matter if it's equal or even if it's a straight line. Then I want you to take a second piece of tape, divide that first section in half, and then last piece of tape to create your 4th section. So here's what we are gonna do. We're gonna label each one so that we remember what to do after the demo. The first one is just gonna be water. Your second section is going to be salt. Third is gonna be coffee. And then the 4th one is gonna be your plastic wrap. And you can tell I'm not writing on my paper, I'm writing on the tape so that I don't mess up my actual paper. So here's what we're gonna do. It's gonna be the same steps each time. So the first thing I want you to do is get a brush, and I want you to put some water on top of the paper. You're not covering the whole paper with water, you're just touching all 4 sides. And then I'm gonna start with my blue paint. I'm gonna roll my brush in my blue paint, and I'm just gonna drag my paintbrush through my water. And you can see it's kind of bleeding like tie-dye. That's good, we want that. If it doesn't bleed and it's really still, it means you don't have enough water. You wanna make sure you just add a little bit so it'll move for you. And then I'm gonna make my tertiary by layering my purple in here. So where the blue and purple mix, it makes that blue-violet color. And that's my first step for my first one. I can just leave it like that. If I want to go in and mix these a little more, I can. The other thing I could do is I could make a little puddle inside my palette here, and I could mix a blue-violet before I start painting, so I have a extra option here of color. Okay. So that's just called wet on wet. My next one I'm gonna do is the same process. I'm gonna take some water and I'm gonna exit all 4 sides, but I'm not gonna cover the whole thing. I like to do a little check where I look sideways at my paper to see where it's glossy. That's where I know my water is. Then I'm gonna take some paint, drag it through like I did last time. I'm gonna use less blue this time, a little bit more purple. And I like watching how it moves, so the color's kind of mixing on its own. I want some real saturated or dark areas of color. The nice thing about this process is there isn't anything that you can do majorly wrong other than maybe making a puddle mess on the floor. So after I have done my wet on wet, I'm gonna take some salt and I just sprinkle it. And you can see where the salt is laying on the paper, all the pigment is getting sucked up or absorbed into those little crystals. And it's gonna leave behind these little dots that look like little stars. This is great if you want to do like a nighttime sky. Now I'm gonna do the next one, which is gonna be our coffee. So again, same steps. Water exiting all the sides, but I don't want to cover up my whole paper. I'm not doing a wash. And then same process. Take my paint, let it bleed in the puddles, and the paint just carries and moves. It bleeds into each other and it makes that really pretty blue violet for me, or whatever tertiaries that you have chosen. Remember, where it's really dark and saturated, it's gonna dry a little darker. Where it's light, it's gonna dry nice and light. Now this time, instead of salt or sugar, I'm going to use a little bit of instant coffee grounds. And if you're doing this at home and you don't have instant coffee grounds, is there something else that you have in your kitchen that maybe you could use that would stain your paper another color? Like even like little Kool-Aid packs or Crystal Light packs. Something in your kitchen like that would work really well. But you want to make sure that you're putting that coffee grounds inside the puddle part, or where the water is, so it can absorb and it'll branch out and it'll stain it brown. This is really nice if I wanted to like stain mountains a color, or if I wanted to do something that was really earthy like sand dunes. It could be really subtle and nice. And then my last one is going to be my plastic wrap, and it's the same steps again. Water first, make sure that water is touching all four sides of my paper. I'm gonna roll my brush and my pigment, and I like saturated for this one especially. You'll see once we lay the plastic on there, it's gonna pick it up and it's gonna be really nice and make some cool designs. You'll notice that my paper is really buckling or bowing, and that's because of the amount of water I have on there. If your paper does that, you haven't done anything wrong. It's just the paint and the water reacting on the paper. The paper's trying to absorb it. So now I'm gonna take my little piece of saran wrap. I'm gonna give it a gentle scrunch so it makes these little triangle shapes. And I'm gonna lay it right on top of my painting. And you can see where the paper has suctioned itself to the paint. It's making all these cool shapes, and then also where the paper has bubbled up, right where the crease is, the paint is lying in there. So the important thing for this process is you need to leave that saran wrap there. Don't pick it up. It needs to stay there until your paper has fully dried. Now, out of these four options, you can do any of them down at the bottom for your background, and you could choose to just do one, or you could do all of them. I'm gonna do probably a little bit of all of them just for something different so you can see. So I'm gonna get my paper wet. I have a little bit of a bigger brush to help me move my water a little bit faster. So it's a little bigger than some of the brushes that are inside of your bag, but the little brush will work. You could also get a sponge. You could try sponging a little bit, see what works, but my paper is now wet. I'm gonna take my paint and just start letting those colors move over the water. And if I really want to pick up some more paint, I kind of just roll my brush in it. So I just twist it, and you can see my brush picks up the pigment and it makes it nice and dark and saturated, which is really nice for a background. And you'll notice I'm not really cleaning my brush a lot because I'm using tertiaries and I want them to mix. So it's okay, I don't really need to. And if you're working with light colors and you're worried about it making your yellow all dirty, that's okay. You can just get a sponge and wipe it up later in class. What's kind of nice too is if you're at home and you really want to move the paint, and like there's a puddle of water, you can always kind of just blow on it a little bit and that will also move it. And it does some cool stuff too. So if you don't want those brush marks, but you want it to move a little. So I kind of like what's happening. I like where my colors are at. So now I'm gonna find some of those puddles and I'm gonna start incorporating some of my other techniques. So I'm gonna do a little bit of coffee in a couple spots. I like odd numbers, so I'm gonna do probably 3 areas with that coffee, just so it moves throughout the painting. Remember, you don't need a lot, you'll just have to leave it alone. And then I'm also gonna do some salt, and again, it's very gentle. It's not a lot, just a little bit, enough to pick up some of that pigment. And then I'm gonna lay some saran wrap over the whole thing. All right, guys, and that's it. So we're gonna just let this be, and after a couple hours, it should be nice and dry, and you can take your saran wrap off and you can just rub your salt and coffee off into the trash, and it's ready.